I was born in the Bronx, I believe. From there, my parents moved with me to Queens, little house in Sunnyside. My dad was an artist. He was a commercial artist. He worked with an airbrush a lot and did advertising. Sometime he would look at something I had sketched, maybe when I was 12, 13, and he would tell me things like, the lightest light and the darkest dark is never on the edge. And I always remembered that, and it's so true, because even if the dark side of an object always has some reflected light, I always felt that my mother was more artistic than my dad, but it was just the way she lived life, the way she did things in her home. I remember she had curtains with ruffles on them, and she used to use a curling iron to flute the ruffles, and little touches like that that were just specially hers. And she was an amazing cook, very creative, very international with her recipes, although she did come from an Italian background, which was nice too. So food was always important, although it was Depression days. And you don't forget that. It leaves a mark on your life. It does. But remember, my mom just had to be very frugal, and my mother was very creative. She could make, a little bit of food go a long way. We always had enough to eat. So I was just a kind of a kid. But then I was invited to go to the High School of Music and Art, which was amazing. Absolutely. I just loved high school. And had to travel on the subway, change trains. Took me over an hour to go to school in the rush hour. But the return trip was different. School was out around 3 or so. If the trains were empty, as they usually were, some of the music students, if they had their instruments with them, would have jam sessions on the subway. So that was exciting. What I loved about the Art Students League were people of all ages, and I just loved the whole atmosphere there. It was very free in a wonderful sense of that word. My dad died when I was 15. He was 45. He died very suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage. And he was very active in the 7th Regiment, and a lot of my parents' social life revolved around the 7th Regiment. They would have beautiful military reviews, and then there would be a ball afterwards, and he died at one of those occasions. I really think the things that happened in my life, I think God was in the picture. I really do, because after I left the High School of Music and Art, I got a job. Some family friend worked for the New York Life Insurance Company and got me a job there. And I was filing cards, and eventually got a promotion. Instead of putting them in, I was no longer a filer, I was a puller. So I removed the cards, and there were just endless rows of steel filing cabinets. And I had 4 years of high school artwork in a pile. And my mother was the type, if you didn't use it, you threw it away. So she didn't instruct me to do that, but it was just kind of the way we lived. And it was a little tiny apartment with a kitchenette, and there really wasn't a whole lot of room. And I thought, oh, well, been there, done that. It never occurred to me that I might someday have a career in art. It just never entered my mind. I was working for that insurance company, and so I took this pile of artwork, 4 years of artwork, and I tied it up, and I was going to throw it down the chute in the apartment incinerator. And so when I got to the incinerator, it was too big to fit in the chute. And people would put their newspapers on the floor of the incinerator. So I just added my collection to the pile of newspapers. Anyway, the next morning, there was a knock on my door, and it was the handyman that worked in the apartment, knocked on my door, and he said, I found all your artwork. I guess I had probably signed some of them. And he said, I found them in the incinerator. And he said, there's an artist upstairs on the 6th floor, and he uses me as a model. And so I took them all up there to show him, and he thinks you have talent, and he would like to meet you. Well, one talent I had was if an opportunity came my way, I didn't let it pass me by. So I just couldn't wait to get up there. And so that man was Rockwell, who was painting pulp covers for popular publications. And he got me a story to illustrate. I had to show you my first illustration because it is really bad. And I was still working for the insurance company, and we were not supposed to leave the building at lunch hour or any time while we were supposed to be in the building. So I snuck out of the building and I took the subway up to 42nd Street and I delivered this illustration. So I was left in this editor's office, a woman, Jane Littell, her name was, and she took it into the art director. And so she came back, and the first thing she said to me was, well, Alex said we've had worse. Well, I was thrilled because the implication was that he was going to take it anyway. And so that was how my career was launched, or so I thought, because a few weeks went by, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and nothing happened. And I thought, oh my, I'm probably never going to get another chance at this. And lo and behold, sure enough, I did. I got another illustration to do, and then another and another and another. But it didn't take me long. All I had to do was 2 or 3 illustrations, and I quit my job. And I worked for, I think, 4 different editors. And I started out doing the romance, western, and the all-story love. I guess I started out with the love magazines first. All-story love. Popular Publications had numerous magazines. I wish I knew how many, a lot. I had my own studio in my bedroom at home. I also shared that bedroom with my mom, but it was a huge room. And I had a screen, one of those triple screens, and I had my watercolors on the screen. I think on the side where the beds were, I had Japanese prints, and on the side where my studio was, I used to go to the Society of Illustrators where they would have models, and so I had watercolors of those on the other side of the screen. I know when I did covers, I hired models, but when I did illustrations, I think I just made those up. I don't remember hiring models. For every illustration for a cover, I would present 3 sketches usually. And they had to be okayed by Harry Steger, who was the CEO of Popular Publications. And he would generally choose 1 out of the 3. So I would save the other 2 for a while and resubmit them later on. And often one of the ones that were rejected were then accepted because they were all good ideas. But here's an interesting thing. For all the artists that did covers for Popular Publications had to come up with the ideas. The covers were not illustrations for the story inside, and frequently or always, the covers had no connection with the stories. They just captured the flavor of the magazine. Oh, another little sidelight about the DeSotos. He and his wife were very sociable people. But they had one party that my mother and I were invited to. So when we entered the DeSoto's apartment, my mother sort of gave me the elbow and said, oh, Gloria, there's this young man that I see. He's got such good manners. He comes home the same time as I do, and he always opens the door for me and tips his hat. That was in the day when men wore the fedora hats. That was how I met my husband. By the time I came to Pittsburgh, my pulp art was in the past, and the people I knew here most of them maybe didn't even know what I did in the past. It wasn't a hard transition for me because it was a whole new life. I taught for the community college. I taught for the North Hills Art Center. And I usually taught abstract painting. When I first moved here, there were woods all around me. That big house there was not there. There was just 2 or 3 little houses on the road here. I still think of myself as a city girl. Well, I feel very fortunate because even with all the vicissitudes of life, you know, being married and being a housewife and a mother, I always managed to keep something going in the way of artwork. And it's a nice feeling to be able to do that.